The captain's voice rang out, sharp and dismissive. "Return to your seat, or I'll have the crew escort you." Passengers turned their heads, watching as Dana, calm and composed, stood her ground. "I'm not going anywhere," she replied firmly. No one expected what came next. The woman he dismissed wasn't just any passenger. What she revealed left everyone stunned. If you believe respect should never depend on assumptions, hit subscribe now and tell us where you're watching from. The private jet was already humming on the tarmac, its engines roaring softly, as Captain Ryan Carter leaned back in his seat, checking his final flight preparations. The flight was scheduled to take off in 10 minutes, and Ryan prided himself on never being late. He ran his flights like clockwork, precise, disciplined, and without disruptions. "Pre-flight check complete," his co-pilot announced. "Good," Ryan replied, his tone brisk. "Let's keep this on schedule. I don't tolerate delays." Just as Ryan flipped a switch on the dashboard, a knock on the cockpit door made him pause. Frowning, he glanced at his co-pilot. "Who's knocking on the cockpit door now?" "Maybe a crew member," the co-pilot offered. Ryan opened the door slightly, only to be greeted by a calm yet firm-looking woman standing just outside. She was dressed sharply in a tailored blazer, her posture confident and unyielding. "I need a word with you," she said, her tone quiet but authoritative. Ryan's eyebrows knitted together. "This is restricted," he replied sharply. "Passengers are not allowed in the cockpit. Please return to your seat." Her expression didn't waver. "This won't take long," Ryan sighed, glancing at the clock on the wall. He didn't have time for this. "Listen, ma'am, I don't know what this is about, but you need to sit down. We're moments from takeoff, and I won't allow any disruptions." Before the woman could respond, a loud beep interrupted the tense moment. The intercom crackled with urgency. "Captain Carter, there's a priority message for you from corporate." Ryan stiffened. "Corporate?" he muttered, confused. What could they want now? He gave the woman one last sharp glance before shutting the cockpit door and grabbing the headset. "This is Captain Carter. Go ahead." The voice on the other end was firm and direct. "Captain, we've been informed that your flight includes a VIP passenger. Her name is Dana Wells." Ryan's brow furrowed. "What about her?" "Dana Wells is the CEO of the airline," the voice continued. "She's on board to observe operations. Treat her with the utmost respect and accommodate her needs immediately." The words hit Ryan like a slap. He froze, replaying the conversation he'd just had outside the cockpit door. His blood ran cold. "Wait," he said slowly, gripping the headset. "Are you telling me she's my boss?" "Yes," the voice confirmed, "and she's watching your every move." Ryan put down the headset, his heart pounding. The weight of his mistake sank in as he stared at the closed cockpit door. He'd just denied entry and spoken sharply to the CEO of the airline. "This can't be happening," he muttered under his breath, adjusting his collar as a bead of sweat rolled down his temple. He glanced at his co-pilot, who was oblivious to the unfolding disaster. Gathering himself, Ryan took a deep breath, opened the door, and stepped out. But Dana was no longer standing there. Instead, she had returned to her seat, her calm composure masking whatever she might be thinking. He approached her cautiously, his pride shrinking with every step. The other passengers turned their heads, sensing something unusual. "Ms. Wells," Ryan said, his voice stiff and formal, "I believe we may have gotten off on the wrong foot." Dana looked up at him, her expression unreadable. She folded her hands neatly in her lap and tilted her head slightly. "Is there a problem, Captain?" Her tone was polite but carried a sharp edge that made Ryan's stomach twist. The cabin had fallen silent, passengers subtly watching as Captain Ryan Carter stood stiffly by Dana Wells's seat. The air crackled with tension, and Ryan felt every pair of eyes boring into him. He had faced turbulence, emergency landings, and unruly passengers in his career, but this was different. He had made a colossal mistake, and now he had to fix it. "Ms. Wells," Ryan began, forcing himself to sound calm, "I was just informed of your, position with the airline. I apologize if I came across as disrespectful," Dana interjected, her voice as calm as still water but carrying the weight of a storm. She raised an eyebrow and tilted her head. "Dismissive? Arrogant? Take your pick, Captain." Ryan's face reddened, and he struggled to maintain eye contact. "I wasn't aware of who you were." "That much was obvious," Dana replied coolly, leaning back in her seat. "Tell me, Captain, is that how you treat all passengers, or just the ones you don't think are important?" The words cut deep, and Ryan's mind raced to find the right response. "I assure you, Ms. Wells, that wasn't my intention. My focus was on maintaining protocol and safety." Dana let out a soft laugh, the kind that wasn't meant to be humorous. "Protocol? Safety? Or just your assumptions about me?" The tension was palpable, and the murmurs from nearby passengers grew louder. Ryan glanced around, feeling the weight of their judgment. Dana's piercing gaze didn't waver, and for a moment he felt like a rookie pilot being scolded in training. "Let's make this simple, Captain," Dana said, her tone shifting from cold to firm. "I'm here to observe, not to disrupt. But if you think I'm the kind of person who tolerates being dismissed without reason, you're mistaken." Ryan nodded quickly, his pride taking a back seat to damage control. "Understood. Please let me know if there's anything I can do to make your experience better." Dana didn't respond immediately. She studied him for a moment, her expression unreadable. Then she stood, smoothing the hem of her blazer. "Yes," she said finally, "you can start by doing your job." She stepped closer, lowering her voice so only he could hear. "And you might want to think carefully about how you treat people moving forward. You never know who might be sitting in your cabin." Ryan stood frozen as Dana walked past him, heading toward the front of the plane. She didn't look back, her quiet authority leaving a ripple of silence in her wake. His co-pilot peeked out of the cockpit, confusion etched on his face. "Everything okay out here?" Ryan shot him a glare. "Not now." The flight attendants exchanged glances, clearly trying to suppress their reactions. The murmurs from passengers resumed, and Ryan could hear snippets of their conversations. "Who is she?" one whispered. "Did you see the look on the captain's face?" another said, chuckling softly. Ryan took a deep breath, forcing himself to regain composure. He turned to the lead flight attendant, his voice clipped. "Ensure Ms. Wells has everything she needs. I'll be in the cockpit." "Yes, Captain," the flight attendant replied, though the slight smirk on her face didn't escape him. Back in the cockpit, Ryan sat in his chair, running a hand over his face. The reality of the situation settled in like a weight on his chest. Dana Wells wasn't just a VIP passenger, she was the CEO of the airline. The very person who could decide his future with a single phone call. His co-pilot glanced at him nervously. "So, what's going on? Why's everyone acting weird?" Ryan sighed heavily. "That passenger I told to sit down and stop bothering me? Turns out she's our boss." The co-pilot's eyes widened. "Wait, the Dana Wells?" Ryan nodded grimly. "Yeah, that Dana Wells." The co-pilot let out a low whistle, shaking his head. "Well, this flight just got a lot more interesting." Meanwhile, Dana returned to her seat, her expression calm but her mind racing. She wasn't one to let her authority overshadow fairness, but Captain Carter's dismissive attitude had struck a nerve. She had worked her way up to this position, overcoming countless assumptions and judgments along the way. This wasn't the first time someone had underestimated her, but it was the first time it had happened under her own airline's roof. As she settled into her seat, a flight attendant approached nervously. "Ms. Wells, can I get you anything?" Dana smiled politely. "I'm fine, thank you. Just let me know when we're in the air." The flight attendant nodded quickly, retreating with visible relief. Dana glanced out the window, her gaze drifting to the tarmac below. She had planned to quietly observe the flight and assess the crew, but it seemed fate had other plans. In the cockpit, Ryan's thoughts were interrupted by another call from corporate. He hesitated before answering, already dreading what he might hear. "This is Captain Carter," he said, his voice subdued. "Captain," the voice said firmly, "Ms. Wells has informed us she plans to file a report about today's incident. I'd advise you to tread carefully for the remainder of this flight." Ryan's stomach sank. "Understood," he muttered. The call ended, leaving him alone with his thoughts. He knew one thing for certain. This flight wasn't going to be a smooth one. Not for him, anyway. The jet cruised smoothly at 30,000 feet, but inside the cockpit, Captain Ryan Carter was far from calm. His hands gripped the controls, though his mind wasn't on the flight. It was on the stern, composed woman seated in the cabin behind him. Dana Wells, the CEO of the airline, his boss. Ryan replayed the encounter over and over in his head, each memory stinging more than the last. He had dismissed her, raised his voice, and flat out ignored her request, all before realizing who she was. "Captain," the co-pilot said cautiously, breaking the silence. "You okay? You've been quiet since takeoff." Ryan sighed heavily, adjusting his headset. "I don't know if I'll be okay after this flight," he muttered. "I've got the CEO of the airline sitting back there, and I've already managed to insult her." The co-pilot let out a low whistle. "Well, look on the bright side. At least she hasn't fired you yet." Ryan shot him a glare. Not helping. Meanwhile, in the cabin, Dana Wells sipped her water, her demeanor calm but her thoughts sharp. She had been quiet during the flight, observing the crew and taking mental notes. The flight attendants were professional. The service was excellent, but none of it erased the condescending way the captain had treated her earlier. A flight attendant approached her tentatively. "Ms. Wells, is there anything else I can get for you?" Dana smiled politely. "No, thank you. You've been wonderful." The attendant hesitated for a moment, then leaned in slightly. "If you don't mind me asking, are you really the CEO?" Dana raised an eyebrow but nodded. "I am." The attendant's eyes widened. "Wow, I had no idea. We knew someone important was on board, but—" She trailed off, glancing toward the cockpit. "Does the captain know yet?" Dana's smile didn't falter, though her tone turned slightly amused. "Oh, he knows." The attendant swallowed nervously. "I hope he didn't." Dana waved her hand dismissively. "It's fine. Let's just see how the rest of the flight goes." In the cockpit, Ryan's nerves were getting the better of him. He adjusted his mic and finally made the decision he'd been avoiding. "I'm going to speak to her," he said abruptly. The co-pilot blinked. "You sure that's a good idea?" "No," Ryan admitted, standing and straightening his jacket. "But I can't just sit here and let her file that report without at least trying to explain myself." Ryan stepped into the cabin, his heart pounding as he walked toward Dana's seat. Passengers turned their heads, sensing that something unusual was happening. Dana looked up calmly as Ryan stopped in front of her. "Ms. Wells," he began, his voice steady but subdued. "May I have a word?" Dana gestured to the seat across from her. "By all means, Captain." Ryan sat down, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. "First, let me say how deeply sorry I am for how I handled things earlier. I didn't know who you were, but that's no excuse for my behavior. I was dismissive and unprofessional, and for that, I sincerely apologize." Dana studied him for a moment, her expression unreadable. "Go on," she said simply. Ryan cleared his throat, feeling the weight of her gaze. "I've been a pilot for over 20 years, and I've always taken pride in running a smooth operation. But I let my assumptions get the better of me today, and that's not the kind of leader I strive to be. I made a mistake, and I hope you'll allow me the chance to prove that this isn't who I am." Dana leaned back in her seat, her eyes never leaving his. "You're right about one thing, Captain," she said after a pause. "Assumptions can be dangerous. You assumed I wasn't important enough to warrant your attention, and that assumption nearly derailed this flight before it even began." Ryan nodded, feeling a knot tighten in his chest. "I understand, and I'll do whatever it takes to make things right." Dana tilted her head slightly, as though weighing his words. Then she leaned forward, her voice quiet but firm. "Captain Carter, I've seen a lot of people in leadership positions who forget what it means to treat others with respect. Today you reminded me how easily that can happen. But," she added, her tone softening just slightly, "you also showed me that you're willing to own your mistakes. That counts for something." Ryan felt a flicker of hope. "Thank you, Ms. Wells. I appreciate that." Dana smiled faintly. "You're not off the hook yet, Captain. When we land, we'll be having a longer conversation about what went wrong and how to ensure it doesn't happen again." Ryan swallowed hard, but nodded. "Understood." Dana leaned back again, her tone shifting to something lighter. "For now, let's just focus on getting everyone to their destination safely, shall we?" As Ryan returned to the cockpit, he felt a mix of relief and dread. The flight wasn't over yet, and his career might still be hanging in the balance, but at least he had a chance to make things right. Back in her seat, Dana glanced out the window, the faintest smile playing on her lips. She wasn't one to hold grudges, but she also wasn't one to let things slide. This flight would be a lesson for Captain Carter, and a reminder that respect should never depend on assumptions. Sometimes, a single moment can teach us the importance of respect and humility, no matter who's in front of us. Have you ever been in a situation where someone underestimated you? Share your story in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe to hear more thought-provoking tales like this one.